Did you remember and or know that I had this little smart car? If you didn't remember and or know, then I wouldn't blame you because I've had this thing for over 3 years and it's been unlicensed the entire time I've had it. It's just been sitting in various places wondering what it did to deserve this sort of abandonment. It didn't do anything, little smart car. I still love you. That was creepy. I bought this smart car all those years ago at a garden variety used car dealership that had it listed for sale for, I think, $2,600, $2,700. I don't remember what it was. I think I paid $2,300 for it because I'm a shrewd negotiator. And because it wasn't worth very much. And the reason I wanted it is because this is a first generation smart car, and I also have a Wigo, an electric car that is built on the body shell of the Chinese Shuanghua Noble, which is known for being the Chinese clone of a first generation smart car. So I wanted an actual first generation smart car so I could see just how similar the two cars were. And they are quite similar. The similarities are superficial, but their similarities are striking. So essentially I bought this car as a video prop. Like I said, this is a first generation smart car, which is important because Mercedes did not officially sell the first generation smart car in the United States. They didn't bring the smart car over to the United States until the second generation. This is one of about 1,000 or so first generation smart cars that was imported and converted to US DOT regulations by a company called G&K Conversions. They had to do things like replace the headlights with the US DOT regulation headlights that are uglier. They had to add side marker lights, and they had to convert the speedometer and other gauges to read in miles instead of kilometers. I think that's all they had to do. They probably had to crash test a few of these for safety regulations, but these are gray import cars that are converted. They also added these badges on the side, which give you information about the car, which is helpful if you walk up to a car in a parking lot and want to read on it. It's silly, but it's neat. When I first brought this car home, it had a number of small issues with it. Most notably of which is both door handles did not work. They were both broken. Anytime I wanted to get into the car, I had to do so through the back by opening the hatch, and then opening the tailgate, and then crawling in there and opening the doors from the inside, which is less than ideal and less than dignified. Thankfully, fixing the door handles on this car is pretty easy. I think I ordered a whole new door handle for one side and the other side was just a broken cable, but I could be wrong on that. And replacing these door handles is incredibly easy. There's just one screw holding them in place and they just pop in. The entire exterior of this car is very modular and very well put together as far as customization goes. Supposedly, in a couple of hours, you can change the exterior body color of this car by just swapping out all the panels, save for this tritium cell piece here. Everything else is plastic and is removable from the outside, which is kind of neat. I also had to get all new tires for this thing, which, considering what I paid for the car, was pretty expensive. I think I spent $600 or $700 on these tires, but they're brand new now. 3 years later, still brand new. But the biggest problem I had with this car wasn't so easy to fix, and it baffled me for about a year, and that was it had an electrical gremlin. I would be driving along or doing nothing at all, and the car would just shut off. All the gauges would go blank, the whole car would die, and then it would reboot, which is, you know, dangerous and annoying. And the problem with the computer cutting out was a little deeper than just the obvious, oh no, it cuts out problem, because I live in one of the counties in Missouri that requires an emissions inspection. And the emissions tests in Missouri, they're not good. They don't stick something in your tailpipe and measure the actual emissions of the car. No, they just stick a scanner, they plug it up to the OBD2 port of your car and make sure that your computer doesn't have any check engine lights, and that's about it. And the problem with my computer cutting out in my smart car is that the computer was never on long enough for it to report a success signal back to this scanner tool, so it always failed the emissions test. That was the first problem. The second problem was, for whatever reason, the emissions scanner tool that they plugged into this car caused the odometer to jump forward by 13,000 miles. It went from 67,000 miles to 80,000 miles without even moving. It's remarkable. So that's why I didn't license it originally, because it wouldn't pass the emissions inspection. And because it jumped the odometer forward by so much, I was afraid to give it an emissions test again, even if I could fix the computer. Because what would it do the second time? Make this the world's first million-mile smart car without even moving? So because of that, it just sat. I did drive it around for the first 30 days because I don't need an emission inspection to get a temporary tag, but I wasn't even afraid to drive it around then because the computer would cut out and I would die on the highway, and that was a little terrifying. So mostly it sat. Eventually I did get around to making the videos with this car that I bought it for, but again, it just sat most of the time. After some time had passed, I got around to making some videos about this car, explaining the backstory on it, why I got it, explaining smart cars in general, etc. And I also explained all the electrical problems that I was having with this car. And I had a lot of commenters chime in with what they thought was wrong with the car. And by and large, they were all terrible suggestions. But I had one guy, the head of the website evolution.co.uk, which is the premier website for smart car repair. He chimed in, left a comment, and suggested the problem is with my SAM unit, the computer in smart cars. So all I had to do was take out the SAM unit, unfold it, because it's this weird folded circuit board assembly, resolder the joints that are prone to failure, and then my problem will go away. So I did exactly what he suggested. It fixed my issues. The electrical problems went away by just resoldering some joints in the computer. It was wonderful. But even though my computer was fixed, I was still afraid to take this thing in for an emissions inspection. I didn't want the car telling the world that it had been to the moon and back, when in reality it had just been to the Apollo Theater and back. So it sat around some more, unlicensed, unused. I did make attempts to sell this thing a couple of times. I made a Craigslist ad for it, posted up for sale, and I mentioned on video a couple times that I was trying to sell it. It's for sale! I'm asking $3,000. Send me an email. Make me an offer. I'm on the east side of Missouri. I had a lot of people emailing me telling my Craigslist ad was hilarious, but that's not exactly interest in the car. I did have a couple people say, I'll give you $1,000 for it, which, as you may or may not know, is nowhere near $3,000. So no one bought it, and it stayed in my possession, and it sat around, being not hit by bus debris. Then after some time had passed, an indefinite amount of time, I think 2 years or something, I decided to try to get this thing back on the road again, because we have a neighbor who is 16, I think, and he was in need of a car. He had no car, and he actually showed interest in this smart car. So I told him, if I can get it running again, it was running, but if I can get it to pass the inspection, then I'll sell it to you for $1,000. $1,000, not $1,000. $1,000 is way more than this car's worth. So in order to get this thing roadworthy again, for the teenager that needed a car, I worked up the courage to take this thing in for an emissions inspection again. And this time, it still failed. And it failed for the same reason that it did the first time. The computer had not been powered on long enough to report back anything useful to the emissions scanning equipment. Except for this time, it wasn't because the power kept cutting out, it was because I hadn't driven the thing enough. Or at all. Oh yeah, and if you're wondering if the second emissions test made the odometer jump forward again, the answer is yes. When I took it in, they did the safety inspection first and then the emissions inspection, and according to the safety inspection report here, the odometer read 80,529 miles. And now the odometer on the car reads 81,642 miles. I did drive it a little bit after the emissions test to get some miles on the car, but I did not drive it 1,000 miles. I drove it maybe 20. But all I had to do to make this car pass the emissions test, so they told me, was just drive it around a bit. Run the engine through some hot and cold cycles and put some miles on the car so that the car's onboard computer could gather up information about the car's onboard emissions system and report that back to the emissions test scanner tool thingy. And after I drove it around the block 3 or 4 times without plates, being incredibly nervous and eye full of cops, it still failed. The check engine light came on, which is an immediate failure on the emissions test, so I gave up. I did order a computer scanner tool and plugged it into the car to see what the problem was. One of the codes was an O2 sensor, which is easy to fix, but another code was some sort of computer fault, which is not so easy to fix. So I gave up, and I broke the bad news to the teenager who needed a car and told him that it's not going to be the smart car, unfortunately, because unless you move to another county, you're not going to be able to put this back on the road, license it and stuff. Which brings me to today. The reason I have pulled this car out from its little hidey hole, and the reason I'm making this video, is because this car is sold. Yes, the check engine light is still on, but that doesn't matter because the buyer lives in Michigan, where there are no emissions or safety inspection requirements for cars whatsoever, which is nice. I wish we had that here. I could have probably made this thing roadworthy if I would have been willing to invest the time and probably money it would have taken to get a proper code scanner for this car and fix the codes one by one that are causing that check engine light and causing the emissions test failure. But clearly, since I never did it, I was never willing to invest that sort of time or money. Now, I'm going to be a little bit sad to see this thing go, but I'm very happy that it's going to someone who is very interested in it, wants to tinker with it. The buyer has had first-generation smart cars before, so he has a little bit of experience with these things. And most importantly, he can actually use it on the road, like a real car and stuff.